Hello, everyone. Welcome to another office hour. It's Claire, and we're going to be talking about astrology for probably an hour, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Welcome to everyone who is here. Thanks for joining me again. If you're coming on back, welcome if you're new. I have a chat over to the right-hand side of my screen. You can put any of your questions or comments in there. I do check in with it really frequently when I'm here because that's why I'm here. I do have some orders of business, some things to cover from kind of outstanding questions. And let's see, I'm actually going to start with an amendment. But before I do, I don't think anyone's here yet. But I'm just going to start with one amendment to last month's office hour. Uh, Someone had mentioned, and I guess maybe I should just throw the chart up here. Someone had mentioned inverse nodal return, and it like confused me. And I got confused, and I sounded kind of what I thought. I didn't like my tone after I re-listened to it. So I wanted to apologize to whoever that was. I got confused. I had never heard that terminology. I was like, that sounds like when it's square to itself or something. But no, that's a term that is used. So anytime anyone has a birth chart, they've got a south node, a north node in that birth chart. And once every, I think it's a 9 year, 18 years total, if I'm correct. Now I feel like I need to check myself before I wreck myself. Um, oh no, that doesn't work. But anyway, it comes back to its opposite location. So the north node ends up where the south node is at birth, and the south node is where your natal north node is. And so it's inverse from where it usually is. And what I call it is a nodal opposition because it's 180 degrees. So actually, I will use Pamela Anderson as our exemplar because I'm going to talk about them in a little bit. Pam, I call upon you. So they have their lunar nodes here in Taurus and Scorpio. And a few years ago, they would have been having their nodal return. So we can see in transit, the north node has reached the same place that it was at birth. But if we move forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's 18 years, it's 9. Then we get the inverse nodal return or nodal opposition, tomato, tomato, potato, potato. So I just wanted to circle back around and amend that and say, yeah, I get it now. So thank you for that terminology update. Uploaded to the system. That was thing one. Thing two that I wanted to mention. Uh, let's see. This is kind of like a little bit of old business, also an amendment, but let's talk about transits and let's talk about bounds and when a planet is in their own bound. And I'm going to check in with the chat here, though, before I do. Hello from Canada. Hello, neighbors from the north. Sorry, the United States is weird now. I'm coming to you live from Madison, which is like 2,000 miles north of the Gulf of Mexico. All right. Yeah, that's how we stand here. Yeah, thank you, Fran. The inverse nodal return, the nodal opposition is every 9 years. Well, every 18. You get my drift. Hello, Sam. Oh, someone's in their nodal square time. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Let's talk about planets and their bounds. I stole that too. I heard that on a local radio station. The it was WORT, the local radio station. They said, coming to you live from blah 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 miles north of the Gulf of Mexico. I was like, that's amazing. We're gonna do that just to signal. Okay, let's talk about bounds. Let's get my complicated wheel up here. So I made a thread. That was my first mistake, is that I was on threads. And I was on threads at the end of January, and I was saying, hey, we're going to have this time coming up where Mercury is going to be moving into Aquarius. And when they get into Aquarius, and for the first approximately 7 degrees here, Mercury is in their own bound. And why that's extra important to know, and this was from, yeah, like January 27th to February 1st. That was when Mercury was in their bound, depending on time zone. So January 27th to February 1st. And this is important to know because Mercury was really close to the sun. And when a planet is within 15 degrees of the sun, which here we got sun at 9, it looks like it's really far away. It's an illusion of the software. They're only 8 degrees away. That's within combustion range, which is not an ideal condition for a planet. That's actually very unideal. It is not a helpful condition. It is too hot underneath those beams, and they also become hidden. A lot of the Hellenistic astrologers talked about a planet becoming less effective when they're under the beams. And in medical astrology, they would talk about a planet entering that 15 degrees from the sun, entering into the beams, applying to the sun, like going into their sick bed. And maybe they were saying that about especially combustion within 8 degrees. Now I can't remember. But then I think it was combustion. And then when they were getting out of it on the other side of the sun, like maybe 8 degrees on the other side of the sun, coming out of that situation, um, 15 degrees away from the sun, coming out of those beams, out of that difficulty. Now, Mercury is, yes, in that difficulty, but in their bound, there's a loophole where it's like they get a little umbrella. It's called chariot, a planet being in their chariot. And it was seen as a one of the means. I mean, originally, the concept of chariot, as I understand it, had to do more with domicile rulership. As the tradition developed, more and more, it was used to we used it in more of a fine degree level, saying, okay, maybe when a planet is also in their own bound, they're also protected from the beams of the sun, similarly to how they might be if they were in their own domicile. Now, I don't think I've never heard of anyone doing that with decans, although, I mean, if you choose to, that's cool, but it would be very weak. And that's what I wonder too, is if this is like a gradient thing. Like maybe the best chariot, the best cab, with the thing with the roof, the best umbrella, maybe that's when a planet is in their own domicile. Here, maybe they're given like a wet rag they can put it on their head or something to like keep keep cool. But I had thought, I had made a thread and said, maybe this would be a good time within kind of crummy weather, like not good astrology weather for Mercury things, for communicating, buying, selling, traveling, writing, listening, speaking, all these Mercury things. Maybe I thought when Mercury's in their own bound between these few days, it's a nice little window where maybe we can get some stuff done, send some packages, send some emails, um, do these things. And okay, cool. Thread sent, posted. Let's fast forward to those actual days. And this is where trigger warning comes in because I'm going to start talking about some sad stuff. Um, and long story short, I'm going to give some evidence about why I am considering not putting as much stock into the protection that a planet might get under the beams, because there was a bunch of plane crashes during this time. Um, and I was like, well, and really quite remarkably so, like within a short period of time, on the 29th, there was a really sad, all of them were sad. There was an accident in Washington, D.C., and then there was one on the 31st in Philadelphia. And then this was after Mercury got out of their bound. So, I would have expected this anyway, but Mercury not being in good shape. Alaska, there was another small aircraft accident on the 6th of February. And so that had me wondering because they're all in the United States. And we know that the United States, like the Sibley chart, well, that's not what I meant to do. The Sibley chart is an Aquarius rising. And so Aquarius ends up in the third house. Nope, that's not what I want to do either. Sorry, y'all. Technical difficulties. Speaking of Mercury, okay, I'm just gonna like pretend that this is the Sibley chart of the US. Mercury was in our third house of local regional travel, okay? Also, a planet of long distance travel, the sun is also not doing well. So that's one confounding variable that a planet of larger trips, bigger trips, was not in good shape this whole time either. But then, yeah, when Mercury was in their bound, but really not doing well otherwise, we had these accidents. And so, again, long story short, that just was very poignant to me that I don't know how much stock I'm going to be putting in a planet being in their balance when they're really close to the sun in terms of considering it protective. Maybe when they're in their domicile, yeah. Maybe when they're in their exaltation, sure, but not bounds or triplicity or anything like that. No one's getting a reasonable chariot for that. I don't know how people's buying and selling went. My communication went fine. I didn't have any, hiccups there. But yeah, that was really remarkable. And I wanted to share that because it was something that I was like, yeah, everyone, it's going to be fine. And then it wasn't fine. So I feel like that needs an amendment. This happened once before, and this was actually a different issue. I had made a declaration about travel. I do not have good luck with travel. Maybe I should just not talk about travel. My Mercury is afflicted. Um, but it was during the holiday season, and I had mentioned that it might be okay to travel. And then there was like a 100-car pileup in my vicinity. And I was like, well, that was not a good day for travel at all. I had discounted Venus retrograde, like conjunct. So I don't know. I feel like that there were some other things in the sky that I had missed. Uh, and maybe that's what's going on here too. Maybe it is just the sun in the Sibley chart being in detriment in the third and all these problems. And a lot of it was like regional shorter flights. Like it wasn't any long flights as far as I understand. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I'm seeing some comments come in. Let me see. I do think, yeah. So someone has Mercury in their bound in Pisces. I have Mercury in the 12th in their own bound. And I feel like I do get some help. Like, I think things would be worse for me if Mercury were not in their bound. Um, but I've kind of gone back and forth over the years on how much stock I put into it or not. And it's usually dependent on whether, how many communication challenges I'm having that day. Like I do this, which I don't think this is my Mercury as much as it is my Jupiter Mars ruled third house. I think that's what allows me to do this at all. In my private life, I struggle with speech a lot. I struggle in a lot of different weird ways with communication and speech in person with people, with volume. You can guess what my health stuff is, but all to say, like, yeah, mm, it's not as helpful as I would like. It's like clearly I still have a problematic Mercury. Oh, that's also within 2 degrees of the sun. So I have a very combust Mercury. Yeah, let me back up. What the heck is bound? I sped ahead here and I didn't even explain a foundational concept, so I apologize for that. Okay, so we all are familiar, probably, hopefully, with the signs of the zodiac. And each of these signs has a planetary ruler. Cool. Yes. Then there are these subdivisions of the zodiac where we can kind of divide each sign up into a bunch of different segments that each have their own planetary ruler. So it's these ways of adding more nuance and more detail in. So for instance, if like let's look at this person's Mars, if we had this hypothetical person born on this date, their Mars is in Cancer in the eighth, but it's a Mars that's in the bound of Jupiter. And so where we might expect Mars to maybe be more, Mars is conflict, Mars is competitiveness. In Cancer that might be muted, but then even further, being in a bound of Jupiter, who is a planet of goodwill and Maybe they're really motivated quietly toward knowledge. So we can just add more and more and more to it. So that's what a bound is. It also functions in terms of dignity, which are all of these like space points that we assign to a planet to tell us or to kind of figure out how good of condition or difficult of condition is that planet in. And so a planet in their own sign is a good condition thing. A planet like Mars right now, who is quote unquote fallen, they're not getting as supported. Their dignity is going to be less here. But like let's say if they were over here in this first bound, in their own bound, then they have a little bit of extra dignity there than they do the rest of Cancer. So it's part of a way of describing things in more nuance, and it also functions as part of the dignity scheme and the way that we assign planetary condition to or condition to a planet. Thank you for asking that. I should have started with that. Uh, let's see. Yeah, Fran, I agree. This is actually quite relevant to the weather that we're having now. Um, I will fast forward here a few weeks, but eventually, oh, did I fast forward too much? We're gonna have Mercury and Venus together again soon. They'll be here together. Are they gonna be coming back together too? They're both coming to Pisces. Yeah, they're both coming back to Pisces. Okay, so when a planet like Venus is in Pisces like this, and Venus is in their exaltation, so um, in terms of that dignity discussion, like that planet being supported and having resourcing and being able to do their job and be Venus really well, they're able to do it at like peak Venus, like the best in Pisces. That's where they're exalted. And the thing to know, and to Fran's point, is that Mercury benefits from that. Mercury being in the same sign with Venus in the weather that we're having right now, or very soon, Saturn is going to be with them as well. So it's like when there's a really like important person at the party, and so they bring in the really good food and everybody gets to eat it. So that's cool. And I agree. Same thing for reading a birth chart. It helps to have an exalted planet around. Ooh, wow. Someone has a really beautiful name. It sounds like someone from my old burlesque times. La petite planète de Roxy. It sounds like very like smooth operator. Welcome. Yeah, and that's something funny too. I guess while we're talking about Mercury and Mercury in Pisces and Mercury being really far away from their Virgo home when they're in Pisces, that usually they want like an Excel spreadsheet, a clipboard, a nice set of pens, the things that the calculator. Um, in Pisces, they're not necessarily given the tools that they would like to do those things, but Mercury is still able to do math. It's just they might have to like write it in the sand or something. Mercury can still tell time. It's just they might have to get creative about how they do it, like use a water clock, like ancient people. I find that people with Mercury and Pisces have a very keen ability to like present information in a way that is very receivable by others, where they take liberties with it. They like make a poem or add really funny clip art or even make like really good visual data. All of that I see with Mercury Pisces people. They have a lot of strengths in communication, but there can be difficulties and there can be some of that skill being wrought out of having to do things differently. So it's not to dismiss, because I've also heard people with Mercury and Pisces say that they feel like they are just very different than their peers in that area of life and they are doing things differently. And it's not worse or better, but when you are in that kind of lack of congruence or there's that lack of similarity, that can be difficult for a lot of different reasons, depending on what society offers us as support. Oh boy, dignity discussions. We're always falling into them, which is appropriate because it's a big deal. Let's see what else. Some other questions in here. Yeah, and Fran is mentioning that she's heard in Chris's podcast the discussion about a planet in its own bound having equal strength to a planet in its own sign. This is one of those long debates there's a diversity of thought on that throughout the traditions. There's not one answer in terms of people deciding. And by the medieval times, and in terms of bound dignity, there was a lot of diversity of thought as well. So uh, nothing written in stone there. And it's these exact instances of like, okay, if a planet is like, and there's these two different discussions in here. There's one about a planetary strength and dignity, and then there's one about being protected from the beams of the sun, which is a different conversation. So we can talk about planet like this, have a planet having dignity that's the same strength, versus domicile versus exaltation versus bound, and you can argue for 2,000 years about, that pro or that prioritization. Um, it's and then in the medieval traditions, we see like the point system really be developed and used for a lot of things to look at planetary condition. This whole other issue of protection from the beams, whole separate deal. And that's the thing I'm questioning. I'm also questioning the dignity thing too, because of my own experience of difficulties with communication. However, yeah, here I'm like, too many plane crashes, too many plane crashes with, when I really thought that they would have a reasonable chariot intact, and they did not. That was just simply not the case. And the fact that it was happening in the places in the Sibley chart, because I was like, I actually Googled, I was like, is this happening elsewhere in the world? What other air accidents have been happening elsewhere? And I didn't find any other big ones. It was just the US. So yeah, it was just really remarkable. And I mean, this is a good process to have to question things. Someone's asking about the eclipses. I was looking at the Aries eclipse next month, and I noticed both Venus and Mercury go to the eclipse degree, go retrograde as if they can't get through before the eclipse. Yeah, let's take a look at that. So we've got stationings. So first Venus, which I believe is 10 degrees. Yeah, 10 degrees of Aries. And then on the 15th, Mercury stations at 9 degrees of Aries, retrograde. And then we get that eclipse on the 29th of Aries, or sorry, the 29th of March at 9 degrees of Aries. So all of this is happening at 9 and 10 degrees. So thing one, I mean, if you have personally in your own birth chart any planets or points in that first 10 degrees or around 10 degrees of cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, this eclipse might be more noticeable for you. It might be louder because you're just closer to it by these configurations. So look in your birth chart. Thing two, look to see if, I mean, also it matters, and this goes for everything, but what perfection years you're in. If you don't know what that is, it's okay. Don't worry about it. But there's these other layers of timing that make a planet and a place more active or not. So sometimes eclipses are louder for people. Sometimes in some years, Aries is a more active place for you. And if that's the case for you, then this eclipse might be more noticeable. For other people, it might not be the main story. And then putting it together with the fact that we've got Venus and Mercury stationing at these places, then this tells us that their stories, this becomes a lot. I'm about to draw a lot of lines. I'm going to be personally considering how are these other Venus and Mercury ruled areas being brought into whatever's the great beginnings and great endings, whatever they are. So great beginnings, great endings, especially in the Aries part of your chart. So whatever house topics have to do with Aries. So this theoretical Pisces rising, great beginnings, great endings with their money, with their resources. But how does that also relate to like your home, your partners, your shared resources, debt, taxes, funds, community, local space? So there's a lot going on here. It's not just a conversation about your money in a vacuum. It's involving a lot of other things that are also in flux, that are also changing, that also just are going through their own rebirths. Because I guess, after this, like or no, right before this, on the 22nd of March, Venus did their cazimi um, sometime right before this. Mercury had their cazimi with the sun. Those are times when Venus and Mercury are at the same degree as the sun. Those are rebirths for those areas of our chart as well. So, uh, yeah, on the 24th. So the 22nd and the 24th, we get these cazimis. And so new great beginnings, great endings with Aries, but there's also these rebirths happening in the Taurus, Gemini, Virgo, Libra areas of our chart and all of the life topics. There's a lot of life topics potentially that are going to be activated by this eclipse. I think that's what I would make of it. I know that was kind of a bit of a tangle, but um, when you get multiple planets coming together, that's one of the consequences is that those planets are in charge of a lot of areas of life that are in other parts of your chart, and that starts to get into the story as well. Oh, Icarus, what did I miss? Oh, I missed some comments. Yeah, just to be clear, any planet in combustion really close to the sun is probably going to struggle in some way, shape, or form. And I can think of a million ways. I would have to see your chart. Uh, let's see. So when we were talking about the travel stuff, the asteroid Icarus has been traveling with the sun. The helicopter plane crash happened with Icarus, sun, and moon conjunct on the 29th. Okay, so that's another very strong piece of testimony um, that we can see. And especially, I mean, especially that one where it was a helicopter that was flying 100 feet outside of where it should have been. That fits very tragically well. That is real. Thank you for adding that. That's a really that's a really important piece of testimony. I don't usually talk about the asteroids, but I do like them. Oh, and they're shouting out um, astrologer Lori Lothian. Lori Lothian uses asteroids. If anyone's interested in checking them out. Thank you for turning my attention back around to that. Let's see. Thank you for the eclipse question as well. Let's see. All right. Let's move on to the next topic. So thanks for listening to that. That's the only sad for today. I think the next thing I want to mention is Pamela Anderson. Let's talk about Pam Anderson. So, if anyone is not familiar, 1990s, early 2000s Baywatch, Pam Anderson, Playboy model extraordinaire, just kind of like a walking piece of art, walking around forever, and was on TV and film a lot, and is now coming into the I guess later stage of life. She's not old, but she was born in 67, so she's no longer in her 20s. She's no longer, doing the thin brows of the 90s. Um, we're past that. And if anyone's been watching in the news, they have stopped wearing makeup. And I thought that that was fascinating. And I almost drew in my eyebrows for this. Like it was a few minutes before this, and I was like, oh my gosh, it looks like I have no eyebrows because they're blonde. And sometimes I draw them in to give the illusion of eyebrows. Um, I don't know. I think it's really funny because I have a Neptune sun, but a lot of people who don't have a Neptune sun, you don't need that to need to draw on your eyebrows. Anyway, I was like, no, I'm gonna be makeupless, naked face in honor of Pamela, who has cast away all of her makeup. And it's just fascinating to me. So of course I looked at her chart because that was so much of her image and her brand and her character and all of that. And it's really, I'll just give a couple sound bites and it's me paraphrasing, but you can definitely like, internet search this and look at the story, which I do recommend. There's a few, tertiary little news bites about it, and that's it's easy to find. But she talks about, I mean, it actually starts out, there's a little bit of a sadness. In 2019, her longtime makeup artist passed away from cancer. And I think that was the first big blow is this person who had been her person to put on her face for bigger things, I think, was no longer there. And so I think that was a first thing. And then not too long after that, so let me just check my notes here. I think it was 2021. I want to say it was 2021. She moved back to her hometown. Um, yeah, it was early 2020s. She moved back to her hometown and started like raising a garden and stopped wearing makeup. And now she's like an earth baby. And she shows up to all these red gala events with no makeup on. And everyone's like, whoa. But she talks about how she really did feel like a character. And she didn't necessarily feel like it was her, but she was really good at it. And she was good at looking like that. And so she went with it. And at some point, she looked at herself and was wondering, like, who am I really underneath all of this? And I think she also had some sound bites about accepting aging, having her ideas about aging change, and wanting to embrace it and kind of more flow more naturally into that stage of her life in a very physical way. And so if we look at her secondary progress chart, this is where I noticed it. And I noticed the makeup thing and the changing in the aesthetic appearance, the loss of a really important friend, um, and then moving home and getting in touch with the earth. I think all of this really speaks to what these planets, Sun, Venus, and Mercury have been doing over the last few years. So if we look at like 2019, and we all know like 2019 was a tough year for a lot of us. 2019, 2020, by transit, we were all having a really big struggle in at least one area of our life back then. That's something that comes up in most of my readings where we end up talking about that. So 2019, we see the sun is about to go into Virgo. It's about to change signs, which progressed only happens once every 30 years. So the sun moving into the fourth house, I know that her IC is in the third. So maybe this is a longer process toward moving home, going back to your roots, um, going more into a private life. I'm sure that was already going on before secondary progress sun went into the whole sign fourth. But when it did go into the whole sign fourth, and I'm hearing her talk about gardening and how important that is all of a sudden, I'm like, oh yeah, that tracks. And then we can see Venus at this point as well, in 2019, 2020, Venus retrograde, going combust. Uh, they had stationed retrograde quite a while before that. That was back in 2006. So I don't think Venus retrograde, which that was the first thing I looked for, was Did Venus station retrograde? Is that what precipitated this change in aesthetic? And that didn't seem to be it. It more seemed to happen, and their Mercury as well. So, Venus aesthetic, Venus beauty, but then this is a Gemini rising person. And so we know that Venus has a special way of representing them. Um, they were in Leo at that time. So yeah, nothing popped out to me there. What popped out to me was, yeah, Sun moving into a different sign, Venus going combust, which can be difficult things with relationships when Venus is in difficult shape. And so, yeah, losing a really good friend would be tough. And then we've got Mercury going through a cazimi in about 2021, 2022. So it's the middle of Mercury's story here. It's not Mercury retrograde, it's Mercury direct. So when Mercury direct meets the sun, that's the middle point of Mercury's story with the sun. So, middle part of this story of Pam's whole life, really, herself, her home, these Mercury ruled things, going through the purifying fires of the sun, being not reborn, but really like I just like to think of it as being purified by the fires of the sun and coming out different on the other side and ready to complete the second half of that Mercury story. And then we get Mercury, speaking of being in your own sign, having protection from the beams. Here we go. Secondary progress Mercury moves from Leo, not having protection from the beams, to Virgo. Now they're going to be in better shape, able to find a nice place, a nice garden. And now all three of them are together. And this all just seems like the recipe. I don't know how to tease it apart any more than that, and I'm sure someone else could. I'm sure there's a whole conversation going on between Mercury and Venus here about personal aesthetic, presentation of self. And then we see the big reveal, the earliest news I could find about when people started to notice her makeup shifting off of her face was that was in 2023. It was January of 2023. That was the earliest I could find. So what was going on in January of 2023? Yeah, we were getting within 3 degrees, or no, what is that? Within 5 degrees, Mercury and Venus. So yeah, a lot of changes in that chart reflecting what we're seeing on the outside. And I just wanted to share that. I thought that was really neat. That's what I have to say about Pam. Thank you, Pamela Anderson, for letting us talk about you lovingly behind your back. And P.S. I am pumped because, okay, personal thing that was so relatable, which is why I picked up this story so much, is like for, I don't know, what was it, 2016 through 2021? 2016 through 2021. No, 2020, well, as late as 2023, honestly. The last time I go-go danced was 2023. And I got COVID. That was the last time I go-go danced. Because I used to do a lot of like fetish events, nightlife events, like spicy nightlife events, and be like ambient entertainment. And I was also a burlesque dancer, and I started doing all of these things in 2016. So it really was like about 7 years. And during that time, I wore so much makeup. Like it was partly a bit of a disguise too, because I look so different. Like I'm one of those people that kind of transforms and looks it's pretty shape-shifty. But that really served me well because then when I would be out and dancing and be wearing pretty much nothing, um, I wasn't as worried about patients from the medical world that I was in walking in and recognizing me or coworkers or something like that. And a lot of times people did not recognize me, and it that worked to my advantage. So makeup was an important thing for me for a really long time. It was just part of the art and the whole thing. And it does, like, I think it, like any kind of amendment, and I guess trigger warning for body type discussions, you can check out if this is like triggering in terms of like body challenges, relationships with the body, but looking so different in different areas and with different people, it kind of did mess with my head a little bit. And I feel like I did have to really hold on to who I was in this core way and not compare myself in any way between the different forms of self that I was representing at any given time. Um, but then coming into a life now where I haven't been doing any of this stuff for a good year and a half, I have worn makeup maybe, I don't know, under 10 times in the last 2 years. Yeah, it's like a whole different thing. And I don't even look at myself in the mirror that much anymore, which is very 12th housey, but it's just not relevant. I just don't care. And then I see myself in the mirror and I'm like, whoa, who's that? But yeah, the makeup thing and then changing that, it's a whole thing. And I just resonated very much with that whole story. And I didn't look at my chart at all. I probably should. Um, yeah, Pamela Anderson. Any other questions in the chat? Last call. We've got about 15 minutes left. And I think I only have one more topic that I wanted to look at. Um, I guess was one more Mercury trouble. This is more for the Fortnite nerds because my boyfriend plays Fortnite. So it's around and I hear about it. And another thing that was happening on the 7th, much less serious, but on February 7th, the PlayStation, the PlayStation people had trouble. And it was right before Mercury went into the cazimi, into the heart of the sun, within 1 degree of the sun. Um, right before that, PlayStation went down and Fortnite went down, and it was down for about a day. And then in perfect timing, they got it fixed right after Mercury went into cazimi within 1 degree. So they got it fixed. Uh, that was another little Mercury blip on the radar. Mercury is technology, but Mercury is also games in particular. So I saw a game that wasn't functioning. I had to look at Mercury. I think my last thing I wanted to talk to was maybe just a love note or a note of well wishes to the Leo risings. Hold, please. Because I kept hearing some poor Leo risings in my comment sections that were having a tough time lately. And so I wanted to address this because we're not quite done with the challenging times. What is challenging for Leo risings? So you've all had Mars in your 12th house for on and off for a while. It got in here in September, October. In November, December, they were more in Leo in your first house. Uh, and then they went back into Cancer. And actually, let me just get those dates specifically in case anyone is interested. Nope, not that one. Okay, this rodeo started on September 4th. That's when Mars entered Cancer for the first time. On November 3rd, Mars entered Leo. So then it was out of your 12th house of mental health, emotional health, and spiritual health. And then January 6th, Mars went back into Cancer. So it's February 13th today. Since January 6th, so the last 6 weeks, we've had Mars back in Cancer again. And so for Leo risings, this is in your 12th house of hidden things, mysterious things, suffering, the navigation of suffering, and also spiritual health, emotional health, mental health, and all related practices with navigating that. The 12th house can be long-standing challenges, grief, loss, goes along with suffering. It's underneath the suffering umbrella. It's a place of exile traditionally, far away travel, but more under duress, under conditions that are not good. And we can also see in the 12th people who are marginalized, disenfranchised, anyone who suffers. Now, Mars here, The first way I always like to consider Mars is just kind of benignly as effort and action. So, effort, action with spiritual health, mental health practices. So, if you've been going to town on meditation and yoga, my dear Leo risings, yeah. Um, if you have been putting action and efforts toward helping people who are uh, cast aside by society, those who are disenfranchised, if you're going hard helping them, yes, that would also fit here. Taking actions on behalf of those who are suffering. Taking actions on behalf of your own suffering. That can be a thing with Mars in the 12th. Mars in the 12th can be, yeah, a lot of motivation and action with if you're fine, if your mental health has been great and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, Claire, I've been fine. um, then level it up. Maybe you've just been putting extra effort in, extra minutes on the pillow, extra, laps wherever, I don't know, but Mars might be putting effort more into there than they usually do when they're in the rest of the sky. Now, on the other side of that coin of yay, Mars, effort, action, they can also be conflict, internal conflict, conflict that's like inside. It can be restlessness if that energy doesn't have a good outlet or it's difficult to find a good outlet for it that relieves it. So if you've been dealing with any kind of discomfort or like let's say you have a long-standing challenge and maybe you've been working really hard at that long-standing challenge, that's not fun. It's a place of chronic health conditions for that reason. It's another long-standing challenge. So if you've been having a lot of inflammation or Mars problems with your health, like in chronic health stuff, that is also not fun. So I don't want to scare anyone. Don't look for that. If you'll know if it's happening. It's like when people say a medical condition and you're like, I've never heard of that. And it's like, okay, then you don't have it because if you had it, you would know what that was. That's exactly how I feel about these things. If you don't see that, or if you're like, I'm not restless, I feel fine. I just feel spiritually motivated. It's like, yeah, good. But if you are one of the people that was like in my sessions or outside of my sessions or in the chat, being like, I'm a Leo rising, things are things are difficult. If that's you, then I want you to hang in there first until February 23rd, because that is when they station direct. And then furthermore, on April 17th, they're going to get out of Cancer. Oh, and I forgot about another really benign thing too. Leo risings for Mars in your 12th, this can be effort behind the scenes. It's just you being a busy hermit, just busy toiling away at all of your things. Um, Maybe busy, exploring occult mysteries. So all of that, all of that energy and effort on April 17th gets out of there and it goes into your first and might feel more actionable, might feel more like, okay, now I can take this and run with it. Um, or maybe just less of that busyness inside, less of that restlessness inside, and just finding its way out a little bit more easily. And that, again, that's April 17th when Mars gets out of Cancer. So it really depends on who you are. Mars does a lot of really constructive, beautiful things in Cancer. It's like I can imagine someone, putting effort into preparing a little space to do their spiritual practices, in a really in a nice way that creates a sense of like comfort and safety in the spiritual space. Like they can be doing cool stuff, but if you're noticing like, yeah, Mars is not doing cool stuff for me, like maybe if you're a day chart, if you have the sun above the horizon in your birth chart, or if uh, Mars is a time lord for you this year, especially in your day chart, yeah, maybe Mars is getting a little too harsh, then yeah, just hang in there for another 2 months and then it'll be over or different. Maybe it'll not be over, but it'll be different. So that's what I wanted to say because I kept hearing it was so many people. I was like, I must address this. Okay, we've got a couple questions to wrap it up. Pretty bitty, what a great question. Any hints, pro tips to remember the lords of the houses? Well, I don't know if everyone will agree with me on this, but I think the Thema Mundi is a great little tool to help us remember. So I'm going to pull it up here. Oh, this is Chris's too. Okay, cool. Chris Brennan's website here, the Horoscopic Astrology blog. So this is the Thema Mundi, and I won't get into the details exactly, but this is how I remember. It does have Cancer rising, and the moon rules Cancer, so you might just have to use like solid memory for those. We've got the moon and the sun representing the hottest, brightest points of the year in the northern hemisphere, associated with Leo and Cancer. And then all of the other planets are going to flank around in this symmetrical pattern on either side of the luminaries. So as long as you can remember this, the moon and the sun, moon Cancer, sun Leo, then it becomes a matter of just remembering the order of the planets and know that it's a mere reflection on either side. So we've got then Mercury, which is the fastest of the planets. It's the closest to the sun. And so that's the next one flanking out. And then we get Venus, a little bit slower, a little bit further from the sun. Likewise, one sign over. And then we got Mars, even slower, further away, so on and so forth until we get to Saturn. And now Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius, winter in the northern hemisphere. Saturn also representing what is slow, cold, difficult, old, winter, serious because I have 5 potatoes in the cellar because it's winter. It's a vibe. And we can see that opposite the luminaries. So we get this beautiful symmetrical thing that's going on here. And I think that's a really good way to root it in. It might not be the easiest mnemonic device. That's the other thing you can do too. If you want to make a story in your head about the sun and the moon, and then in that story, like the sun and the moon go to the grocery store and then they meet their friend Mercury in the ketchup aisle. But Venus hates ketchup. So they go over to the whatever aisle and they see Mars. So make up a whole story. That's a device that people who are in memory, like sports or grad school, they use that. I used to, for drugs, I'd have all kinds of stories for all the drug names, and that's how I would remember what classes they were in and stuff. So make a story. That's another good one. All right. Good luck. Great question. Let me see if there's any more. Um, Insights on nodal returns. I guess what I would say about nodal returns is that they are mimicking, so you're not your nodal opposition, not the inverse one, but the nodal return where the north node is back where the north node was. I'm actually having this now. Yeah. Um, it mimics your birth chart. So if usually you have, if you're this Leo rising, you've usually got North Node in Pisces, it's returning back. It's mimicking those conditions of, yeah, focusing you on the eighth house, putting your attention there because there's more going on there, and doing the bare minimum necessary to keep your Virgo place going in this instance with the South Node, to keep that going and healthy and good so that there's enough bandwidth to deal with Rahu's nonsense and shenanigans. That's what I have to say about that. Mimics the nodal, or it mimics your birth chart, and that's gonna that should give you then for a year and a half, like kind of a nice front row seat to be like, all right, what do these nodes mean in my birth chart? And if they're back to that position again, so pay attention to those life topics in that year and a half, and that will give you a lot of clues as to what that situation is doing in your own natal chart. Yeah, good question. I am going to talk about the eclipses in my forecast, which is going to be in about a week and a half. Did I actually schedule it? I did. It's on February 25th at 3:30 p.m. Central Time, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday, February 25th. I'm going to do my next forecast. I will talk all about the eclipses. I'm going to go into them pretty deeply there. So tune in then for that. Someone said, yeah, I just have to remember to look up the theme of Mooney. Yeah. Uh, Alrighty. I think that's it. I don't see any more questions. Um, Let me make sure I didn't have anything else. Think so. Yeah. Love to the Leo risings. I'm an Aquarius rising. I'm the bizarro version. But I have Leo in my seventh. So guess who shows up a lot in my life? Leos. My mom is a Leo. Uh, my mom is a Leo sun, Mercury. And I think me being Saturn-tastic is the bane of her existence. But since I've gotten softer in my age, I'm easier to deal with than I used to be. My poor mom. Oh my God. All right. That's a great note to end on. Thanks, Mom, for putting up with me. Uh, I send her my newsletter, but I don't think she watches these. It'd be hilarious if she did. All right. Thanks everyone for joining me. I hope you all have a good rest of your February. If you are in the US or Canada or Mexico, I'm sorry, and let's hang in here for another 4 years. I'm going to be, I'm going to try to be an open, welcome, inviting space for everyone except people who are intolerant, the paradox of intolerance. So this channel, this space does not support any kind of intolerance of people. And if that's you, you're the exception. You can GTFO. Um, yeah. So just want to put that out there because it's worth knowing these days. You can check out my link tree and you can check out my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. I have a discount code going on right now. It is Star Student, 15% off any mentoring sessions or tutoring sessions for the month of February. So 2 more weeks of that. STARSTUDENT, Star Student. You get 15% off tutoring or mentoring services. And then I'll have a new one every month pretty much because it's fun. I don't know. I like to do that. I have a newsletter, which you can also sign up for on my website. And the newsletter is just a once a month in your inbox. It's got all my events, links to all the stuff I do here, the discount code for the month, any writings. If I choose to do a rising sign horoscope or writing, it's going to be linked there. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for all of my stuff. I don't send anything out more than once a month, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Other than that, yeah, no other announcements. Thank you to everyone again so much for your contributions and your questions and your comments. I love it. It was a very active chat. I think we did a really good job. Um, yeah, love to all of the Leo suns, Leo risings. Love to everyone, actually. Of course. All right. See you in a couple weeks on the 25th on Tuesday of February, 3:30 p.m. Central Time for the forecast for March. And that's going to be a long one because March has too much stuff in it. It's a big one. So I'll see you then. All right. See you.